Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Philadelphia 76ers. As I'm sure you all know very well at this point, they lost in 6 games to the Knicks after what was a very insane playoff series. One of the best first-round series I can remember, with crazy clutch shots left and right, big-time performances from Jalen Brunson, from Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, some of the role players stepping up, specifically Josh Hart turning into Steph Curry for the series. It was a lot of fun. Also, every game came down to the wire with some of the clutchest buckets you've ever seen, insane collapses from both sides. Masterpiece. Great, amazing playoff basketball. But for the Sixers, it is a kind of disappointing result. You know them. They've got championship aspirations. They have an MVP level guy in Joel Embiid, an all-star in Tyrese Maxey. They wanted to shoot higher than a first-round exit that came from them entering through the play-in. But ultimately, it was just a very weird season for the franchise. It started off with the James Harden trade. In fact, it started even earlier when Harden, after it seemed like he was a guarantee to be back with the Sixers, opted into his player option and said, I want to trade. Go ahead, send me somewhere else. Daryl Morey is a liar. He's a fraud. They eventually obliged, sending him to the Clippers, where it was pretty well known that he wanted to go. They picked up Nick Batum, who would play a crazy part in that Knicks series. They would pick up Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, guys that would each contribute in one way or another. And they started to find some success, mainly because Joel Embiid was playing some of the most dominant basketball of his entire career. Maxey also was evolving into an all-star level guard. You had Nick Nurse really putting things together, the best head coach of the Joel Embiid era. They were looking great, competing for one of those top spots in the East. But then Embiid, of course, suffered that injury that kept him out a majority of the year, and they fell down the standings pretty significantly. However, he did come back. Maxey did enough to keep them afloat, and in the play-in race, they went crazy. I think they finished on an 8-game win streak to end the season. They won in the play-in and had that classic series against the Knicks, with Embiid and Maxey being really good for the most part, but they just ultimately didn't have enough. Jalen Brunson was too crazy. The role players were much better on the Knicks side, and it's that disappointing result that we talked about. This has led to a lot of people saying that the process is over, the Sixers are cooked, they should consider trading Embiid and just building around Maxey. But actually, I feel like going into this offseason, they're in a decent spot. They've got a lot of opportunity to build on the positives we saw last year, but ultimately this may be their final chance to do so and complete the process. Otherwise, we are going to have to start talking about a potential Embiid trade sooner than later. First, let's talk about what they can build on, and I think it comes down to 3 names: Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Nick Nurse. Starting with Embiid, like I said, he had the best season of his career, at least when he was healthy. He was easily running away with the MVP award. We had this great finish to the season with, Jokic and Luka and Shea all competing for the MVP award down to the wire, with Giannis and Tatum and even Jalen Brunson being in there at different points. But if Embiid stayed healthy, I'm very confident he would have won back-to-back MVPs. Nobody was touching the production that he was bringing to the table, 35, 36 points per game, double-digit rebounds, playmaking at an increased level, better playmaking than we've ever seen from Joel. He was diming up guys, getting better, passing out those double teams, as dominant in the mid-range as he's ever been, finishing around the basket, great defensively. The efficiency was some of the best we've ever seen from a volume score. Embiid was having one of the single best big man seasons we've ever seen. And it's a shame that some people might not remember that because he missed so much of the year with injury, but he has never been better than he was at the beginning of the season, which is crazy to say so assuredly for a guy who has won an MVP award, who has competed for multiple in the past. It felt like there was no chance he could win back-to-back awards, but I guarantee you if he was healthy, he would have done it and maybe gotten close to unanimous. That's how insane he was playing. And I think part of that was the coaching of Nick Nurse, who really came in here and changed the system up. For the first time, it felt like the Sixers were cohesive. They were actually running sets that Embiid was getting in good spots to succeed, that they were running a lot of fun actions off of him. Maxey and he were really building a lot of chemistry through that Nick Nurse system. And also part of that is Maxey just becoming probably the best teammate that Joel Embiid has ever had. He's become an elite scorer, a knockdown shooter from the outside, one of the quickest players in the entire league, great attacking downhill. He made some strides as a playmaker, and he's only 23. He's got a lot of room to grow, just became a first-time All-Star. I don't think he's going to make the All-NBA team, although if he's announced to be on it, I wouldn't be surprised. That's how good he was. He was phenomenal, and this has led to him absolutely getting a bag this summer in restricted free agency. But overall, on the roster itself, Embiid and Maxey are the only 2 guys guaranteed to be there, because if you take a look at their salary cap sheet, it's pretty much blank. Joel Embiid will be making $51 million. Paul Reed has unguaranteed $7.7 million, which they could go ahead and move off off of. And outside of Maxey, who's eventually going to sign that big time restricted free agent contract, there's nobody else on the books. This is going to leave them one of the highest cap space totals in the entire league going into the offseason, mainly because Tobias Harris is gone. The Sixers are now rid of one of the worst contracts in the entire NBA. We're going to look back at the fact that Tobias Harris got a max contract and think, what were the Sixers doing? Even in the moment, it felt kind of crazy to pick him over Jimmy Butler. You know, Jimmy Butler has that famous moment, Tobias Harris over me. Now looking back now, it's clearly one of the worst decisions the Sixers franchise have ever made, but he's off the books. They have a lot of money to work with, and this is going to be really important because now they've got a chance to basically handpick what do they want the supporting cast to be alongside Embiid and Maxey. It starts with the guys that they could potentially re-sign, like Buddy Hield, who was not great in his time as a Sixer, although in the final game in Game 6, it felt like they finally found some rhythm there. Buddy Hield was probably the Sixers' second or third best player in that game. He was knocking down a bunch of threes. It makes sense to have a shooter like that next to Embiid and Maxey. You have so much scoring gravity, someone who can go ahead and get in position to receive that extra pass when they send the double over to Joel. It just never really came to fruition in the regular season or much at all throughout the playoffs until that final game. I wouldn't be surprised if they do re-sign him, but if they let him go, I think that also makes sense because the overall product in his time in Philly was not the best. You've also got a guy like Nick Batum, who was amazing in that series against the Knicks, probably their third best player outside of Embiid and Maxey. I don't know how many years he has left because he's getting up there in age, so maybe it doesn't make sense to bring him back. But if he's willing to come back on just a few $1 million a year, I think the Sixers should absolutely consider bringing back Nick Batum. Robert Covington missed a lot of the year with injury. I don't think he'll be back. D'Anthony Melton is an interesting case. He also missed a lot this year with injury, but has had some good moments. Cameron Payne was pretty solid in that series against the Knicks. Maybe he'll be back on a small contract. Kelly Oubre, I think it makes all the sense in the world to try and re-sign him, although he's probably going to ask for a lot more now that he played way beyond the minimum contract the Sixers gave him this offseason. But if you like being in Philly, I wouldn't be surprised if they come to a compromise. And then Kyle Lowry, who went into the starting lineup a lot of his time with Philadelphia, and I thought he was pretty solid overall, although really getting up there in age, so I'm not sure if he's someone that they'll look at re-signing. So all in all, in that group, I think there's like maybe 3 to 4 guys I can imagine me back on the Sixers. But even if they bring back a majority of those guys, which I don't know if they will, they're still going to have a lot of spaces on the roster. They've got to find new names to bring in, and one of the biggest possibilities is the addition of a third star. Daryl Morey said in his interview after the season ended that that's something they're really going to look into. They've got a bunch of cap space. They can make some big offers, give the star the prospect of playing alongside an MVP level player in Joel, a rising star in Maxey, and a brand new supporting cast. It's an enticing situation. Unfortunately for the Sixers, it's a pretty weak overall free agency market, although I do think there are some interesting names. The big one, of course, being LeBron James. Almost every team will try to pursue him if he opts out of his player option, but I think that's unrealistic. Feel pretty certain he's going to go back to the Lakers at this point. That leaves a guy like Paul George towards the top of the free agency class, who I do think is a really good fit with this team. My ideal third star for Embiid and Maxey is somebody at that wing position. They've been really needing a high-level wing for a while. It was supposed to be Tobias Harris, but obviously that never worked out. And while I don't think PG is a great second option at this point in his career, I think as a third option, he'd be one of the best in the entire league. You can let Embiid and Maxey do a majority of the scoring. Paul George can kind of just play off ball, worry about defending at a high level, knocking down threes, attacking off the dribble every now and again, which the Sixers do need somebody else to create a little bit, although PG isn't quite the creator he used to be, doesn't have the same burst. And one concern is that he is injury prone himself. You already have that issue with Embiid. You want to pay a lot of money to a third star who might also miss time here and there like he has over his recent career. It's concerning, and also with him getting up there in age, how much money are you willing to pay to him when he's going to be into his late 30s? There are some question marks, but I do think if you could get Paul George on not the most insane contract in the world, lure him out of Los Angeles, he would be a good theoretical fit next to Embiid and Maxey as that third star. Also towards the top of this free agency class are guys like DeMar DeRozan, who I don't love. He's, of course, a mid-range guy, doesn't really give you the spacing you want. James Harden, never coming back pretty obviously. Klay Thompson is out there, but at this point in his career, I'm not paying him a lot of money if I'm the Sixers. OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam are another couple big names, but I think they just go back to the respective teams. There's not a lot of star power out there. I think if it's not Paul George, it'll probably just be the Sixers trying to add a bunch of interesting role players in the market, which there are some really fun high-level guys like Malik Monk. He is one of the top names out there. It seems like the Kings really aren't going to have the money to pay him and bring him back, so maybe it's the Sixers. They want to bring in another guard who can be a spark plug, I think Monk makes a lot of sense. Bruce Brown, if they want somebody who can defend and knock down some shots, has already proven to be a high-level player on a championship team in Denver. Gary Trent, I think, is a little bit interesting as well. Has some history playing under Nick Nurse. Tyus Jones, if they want another playmaker. Gary Harris. Andre Drummond, bring him back to Philly, where he was a decent backup big and was pretty good this year for the Bulls. Caleb Martin, bring him over. Royce O'Neal is an interesting name as well. He was pretty good for the Suns and Nets this past season. Maybe that's the move, to just try and bring in some high-level role players. Of course, there's plenty of other guys other than these names. These are just some of the ones off the top of my head that I think are interesting. So maybe if there isn't a big name out there on the free agent market, they just sign a bunch of high-level role players with Embiid and Maxey as the lone two stars. There's been a lot of debate about which of those routes the Sixers should try to pursue, whether it's the big three or the two stars with a bunch of role players. But I think there's another option that's interesting as well, where they could just absorb someone's contract for the most part into their cap space, because it feels like there could be a lot of high-level players on the move in this offseason. They're armed with some decent assets. They've got, of course, all the cap space in the world to just absorb a contract. They don't have to send money back to a team. So if there's a squad out there that just wants to go ahead and clear their books for the most part, the Sixers are an interesting team to deal with. They've also got some draft capital they picked up from the Clippers, in addition to their own ability to trade some of their firsts and swaps down the line. And maybe those picks are valuable to an opposing team, because if Embiid ends up walking and you've got their 20-30 pick, it's probably going to be pretty good. So I do think the Sixers have an interesting package. It's not the best one in the world, but it's one that I do think could make a fun deal happen. Let's talk about some of the big names that could potentially be on the move. And one name that has kind of had some smoke around it as of late, kind of surprisingly, is Jimmy Butler. He's had a great career so far with the Miami Heat, given them some crazy moments, brought them to 2 NBA Finals, one as an 8 seed last year. He's been their best player for a long time, but this year he was more unserious in the regular season than ever. It felt like he got hurt at the worst moment possible in that Sixers game, which isn't his fault, but it seems like the franchise might be kind of fed up. Pat Riley was throwing some very non-subliminal shots at Jimmy Butler in their postseason interview, and reports have come out that they're not super excited about the idea of paying him like $60 million plus a year on an upcoming extension going into his late 30s, which is honestly very understandable. But if the Sixers are more willing to swallow that money, and I mean they might be, they gave Tobias Harris a max contract at one point, maybe they could go for a reunion, bring him back to Philadelphia, and team him back up with Joel Embiid. It's not something that I think will end up happening. I'm not even sure if Jimmy Butler will be discussed as someone who gets moved, but it does feel like there is a chance that Jimmy Butler isn't a Miami Heat for that much longer, and Philly, if he does become available, should absolutely make that call. Then you've got a guy like Brandon Ingram, who, according to all indications, the Pelicans are probably going to look to move off of him this offseason and shake up the roster a little bit. He is, again, another guy at that wing position, which is where I really would want them to pursue that third star. He's a solid defender. He's a great mid-range shooter, someone who can create his own shot. I think he'd work really well off Embiid and Max. He can have to shoot more threes. If he can't really do that, probably not the best fit. And also his contract is expiring here soon, so you'd probably want to get an affirmation from him that he re-signed long-term. But if he's willing to stay, I don't hate the idea of them adding a guy like Brandon Ingram, a star that probably won't step on the other two guys' toes that much. They could also go for a guy like Mikal Bridges. I don't know if the Nets are ever going to make him available, but if he does, I think he'd be a great fit, of course, from the Philadelphia era, I believe. I know at the very least, of course, he went to Villanova. They drafted him before trading him, which was a colossal mistake, clearly. I believe Mikal would be really good with this team. I think he still is a really good player, just not as the first option like the Nets are trying to build around him as, but if you put him back in a role as like a third option on the Sixers, I think he'd be incredible. Another name I'm monitoring if I'm the Sixers is Kawhi Leonard. Say PG walks, leaves the Clippers, but it's not to Philly. Maybe James Harden leaves, or even if he stays and the Clippers aren't performing, maybe Kawhi Leonard starts to get unhappy throughout the season, or just looks around him this offseason and says, I got to get out of here. I think Kawhi Leonard would be ridiculous over here in Philadelphia. I know he's getting up there in age. I know he's injury prone, but I think the upside with him, Embiid, and Max as a big three is way too insane to not at least think about taking the swing if you're the Sixers. I doubt any of the Phoenix Suns guys will become available. That's Devin Booker or Kevin Durant. But if they do become available, I would definitely consider going after them. KD in particular would be insane over there in Philly. There's also like Donovan Mitchell, who I don't love as an option. I really don't think they need another score-heavy guard next to Maxey taking the ball out of Embiid's hands. More so a complementary piece that can play off ball. You probably shouldn't go after like a Zach LaVine. I know he was a name that was rumored at times throughout last season, but I just, again, don't love the fit of a score guard next to Maxey. Would rather have someone who's a bit more versatile. well. So yeah, those are some of the names that I'm taking a look at. There, of course, may be other big names that pop up throughout this offseason that we don't even know are potentially going to become available anytime soon. But I do think pursuing a star through trade rather than free agency is a very realistic option for the Sixers, and one that may work out pretty well. I mean, they could even do both. Maybe they sign a big star in free agency like a Paul George, and then throughout the season, somebody becomes unhappy and they use their assets to trade for them, getting 4 stars over there in Philly. I don't think it's impossible. That's why I think this is so interesting. They've got so much cap space, interesting assets, as well as one of the best duos in the entire league between Joel Embiid, who is a league MVP and probably should be a 2-time league MVP, is one of the top 3 players in the world, one of the most talented big men of all time, and Tyrese Maxey, who is not only an all-star right now, but he's a rising all-NBA caliber player. He's only going to get better and better. Again, he's just 23 years old. You've got a good head coach in Nick Nurse, all the money in the world. This is Daryl Morey's shot. If they were ever going to complete the process, this is their last chance. If they strike out here, it's probably over. And I'm someone who hates when people continuously say, oh, the process is over, they failed, all that stuff. But this is the last chance. If they don't do it here, I don't know how they do it for the future. Embiid is already injury prone. It's not going to get better. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got impatient if they didn't build a good roster around him here in this moment with all this opportunity at their fingertips. Maxey's money is only going to continue to rise as he gets better. Morey has to find a way to make this thing work. The Eastern Conference is relatively wide open. Like, the Celtics are clearly the best team at the moment, but there's no clear number 2. Like, the Knicks, when fully healthy, feel like a fit for that spot. Maybe the Bucks figure things out. Maybe the Cleveland Cavaliers make something work. One of the other young teams in the East rises up, like maybe the Magic eventually get to that point, or the Pacers. The Miami Heat add another star. Like, there is a bunch of possibilities, but for this moment, the Eastern Conference feels relatively open to anybody to try and compete, at least to get to the conference finals, where the Sixers haven't been so far. This is their chance to build out a supporting roster, maybe the best of Embiid's entire career, and give him all the tools to get over the hump. And if he doesn't, if he deals with injuries still, then there's nothing they could do in the first place. But they've got to go for broke. They've got to go all out here. They've got to swing for the fences, because this is their final chance to try and complete the process. With all that being said, those are my thoughts on the Sixers team going into the offseason. Let me know down below in the comments what you think the Sixers should do. If you would pursue a 3rd star, who would you want it to be amongst the names that I mentioned? Would you do it in free agency, try and make a trade? Is there somebody else that I didn't talk about that you think would be a fun fit for this team too? Or would you just go for some good role players? Who are some of the names that you would go after? Would you even consider just starting a rebuild right now? Do you think there's no way this thing works? I'd love to hear your takes as always. Let me know what other teams you want to hear about, because with the conference finals about to begin and a lot less playoff games going on every single day, I do want to go ahead and start to get into some of the teams in the offseason, eventually probably talking about almost every squad. So let me know what teams you want to hear me talk about. But for the moment, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I appreciate you all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, safe back.